listener production.
Hey, Tara Cassidy with you, and welcome to The Briefing. For the first time ever in Australia, social media influencers and content creators are being officially welcomed into our political world to cover everything from the federal budget to sitting down for one-on-ones with even the PM himself. But the invite hasn't come without controversy. Last week, it prompted an AEC investigation, while others continue to label the move a joke.
But I'm not going to be able to provide for the sort of journalistic level that a lot of the mainstream media is pointing out. And I admit and acknowledge that. But I think when having this conversation, it's just interesting the level of hypocrisy that we're seeing. People need to exist in a broader ecosystem and have a more sort of in-depth media diet, as I would describe, and know that they're not getting information from one location.
That chat, which is part one of our two-part special looking into content creators in Australian politics, is coming up in the second half of this episode. Part two is in your feeds right now. First though, let's get into the headlines with Chris Spiru. It's Monday the 7th of April.
Morning Tara, morning everybody, happy Monday. And we're starting with some good news for any public servants listening who love working from home. The Coalition has dumped its controversial plan to force you all back into the office 5 days a week. Woohoo for anyone who's celebrating. Shadow Finance Minister Jane Hume says the party has listened to voter concerns and will be ditching the policy just 1 month after it was first announced. In a statement, Senator Hume said flexible work arrangements are part of getting the best out of any workforce, and there will be no changes to it for the public service under a coalition government. It comes as Peter Dutton is expected to provide an update on another one of their controversial plans today, the promise to slash 41,000 Canberra-based public servants if elected.
Yeah, he'll be promising that the cuts won't come from forced redundancies though. Instead, they're going to come from a staggered reduction over the next 5 years through what he's called natural attrition, using things like resignations, retirements and hiring freezes. And from what we know so far, key defence roles won't be impacted. And a reminder, the Coalition's previously said that these cuts won't affect frontline workers in our essential and critical services. But we'll have to wait and find out today if that remains the case, Chris.
Yeah, and it's no surprise that they've kind of backflipped on this promise given how unpopular it's proven to be in all the polling around it. You know, work from home is something that we've spoken about at length on this show. We love it. A lot of our listeners love it. Yeah, so unsurprising this one. The public servants one is also interesting, but again, not surprising given they've been criticised for just how little detail it has. I mean, you can hop back to my deep dive on Friday that I did on it. Even then, even as we were recording with someone who's an expert in this field, even they were saying like, there's not enough detail. We don't even know enough about this to be criticising it and poking holes in it. So very, very interesting, this new updated announcement. And hey, very briefly, it was a bit of a policy-heavy weekend. The Prime Minister was in Brisbane over the weekend announcing his $2.3 billion plan to offer Australians 30% discounts on the purchase and installation costs of a household battery. So those are for people that have solar panels but might not have a home battery. So that could save them $4,000. Meantime, Peter Dutton has promised that he'll slash international students by 80,000. He says that will help housing affordability.
Staying with politics, and a Liberal MP who was vying for a New South Wales seat in the upcoming federal election has been dumped by the party after saying women shouldn't serve in combat roles within the Australian Defence Force. Ex-ADF soldier Ben Britton, who was running as candidate for Whitlam, made the comment on a right-wing podcast before pre-selection, claiming if we are to fix the Defence Force, unfortunately we're going to have to remove women from combat courses. They can't cope with carrying heavy loads and impacts required. The party's since confirmed Britain's no longer endorsed, and he's been removed from their website due to his views, which they say are inconsistent with the party's position.
A man who attempted to open the emergency exit doors on a Sydney-bound flight has been refused bail in court. Australian Federal Police arrested the Jordanian national on Saturday night after the incident on the Malaysia to Sydney flight, where he also allegedly tried to choke a staff member. The 46-year-old's defence lawyer told a Sydney court yesterday he was on medication and a sleeping pill at the time that he had mixed with alcohol and doesn't recall the incident. He'll front court again on Wednesday.
to the US now, where hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the streets right across the country in protest of Donald Trump and Elon Musk.
Keep your hands off our Social Security, our health care, our schools, our immigrant families, our LGBTQ. We are sick and tired of this president wrecking our economy, wrecking our budgets, attacking our people, and we are fighting back.
Hands-off demonstrations were organised over the weekend in more than 1,200 locations in all 50 states of the US, and comes just days after former Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Barack Obama made separate remarks criticising Trump and the White House for moves they've called unconstitutional and contributing to the erosion of the country's values.
Yeah, this was interesting because it wasn't just happening in the US, it also spilled out to Europe a little bit. There were rallies in Paris, London, and other European capitals.
Wow.
I mean, my TikTok For You page was filled with these protests over the weekend. I mean, seeing New York, just the streets lined with protesters is insane. And a lot of the protesters are fighting for a whole raft of things, as that man mentioned in the grab that we just played. But there were different signs that were saying, make America normal again, hands off our schools, our courts, our bodies, Greenland and Canada. Like, there's a whole wave of things that this Trump 2.0 administration has come for that the American public are just saying we're sick of. We don't want to be hearing this rhetoric. We don't want this to be, you know, the legacy that Trump 2.0 leaves America. And it is worth noting, Donald Trump, where was he on Saturday whilst all this was happening? He was golfing. He was golfing. He did put out a truth post saying that this is the beginning of the economic revolution. He asked Americans to hang tight, again, promising that America will be great and wealthy again.
And our Matildas will be looking to make it 2 from 2 tonight in their second international friendly against South Korea. The Tillies took home a 1-0 win on Friday in front of 37,000 fans in Sydney.
Yes, and tonight's match kicks off at 7:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time in Newcastle. I won't make the game in real life, Tara Cassidy, but I'll be flicking on the telly with a cold one in hand, that is for sure.
Well, speaking of cold ones, Chris, have I got something for you?
With every cold sip, we're standing tall. Freedom's alive, and it's here for us all.
And if you didn't recognise that voice, maybe this will ring a bell.
Let there be 1,000 blossoms bloom, as far as I'm concerned. But I ain't spending any time on it, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
That was Queensland's quirky federal MP, Bob Katter, who launched his new beer over the weekend, which he has dubbed Patriot.
Oh!
Yes, and it, of course, has his face donning a white cowboy hat on the front of the can. And Katter says that the lager is very light and very refreshing. Bob Katter in a can.
KAP is brave and bold. Australia's never gonna be sold.
Oh, it's so Queensland, so Katter. I can say that I'm in Queensland, Chris.
Yeah, I love it. I love whenever I see his face. And I mean, I'm not too sure about his policy positions. I'm not too sure actually what he stands for, to be honest with you, other than he's very passionate about crocodiles and the queer community, which is a great combo.
He's so popular every year. Like, he's one of the most quirky ones that we've got in Queensland, and people, though, they love him. He keeps getting voted back in, so we can giggle all we like, but the man's obviously doing something right.
Yeah, and speaking of people who are doing things right, influencers in politics, Tara Cassidy, or are they? I mean, your 2-part special is coming up. We're looking into that. The first part is with Hannah Ferguson from Cheek Media, someone who's been in the firing line, and the second part is with Jenna Clark, associate editor from The Australian, to talk about how mainstream and legacy media feels about influencers encroaching on their territory.
There's been a tug of war between the media, old and new. How politicians try and win young votes, and when having an influence is allowed, depending on what it's used to do.
The election watchdog is reviewing Anthony Albanese and Greens leader Adam Bandt's social media posts with podcaster Abby Chatfield.
The watchdog is considering if the collaborations with a number of podcasters, including Abby, should be actually classified as political content.
If they are, they'll need to be declared as an endorsement and would need an official authorisation message.
Are those posts from the Prime Minister or the leader of the Greens? Are they electoral matter under the purpose of the Act?
And while influencing is the name of the game and welcomed in areas like fashion, finance or food, some have drawn a line at politics and being able to influence someone's vote until we lay down some rules. Digital creator Hannah Ferguson is a self-described opinionated left-wing feminist and commentator with a 220k following on Instagram, and she's one of the creators at the heart of this debate. Hannah, welcome back to the briefing. Let's kick things off with how much will influencers and content creators shape the upcoming federal election?
I think it's fair to say that given Gen Z and millennials make up the most powerful voting bloc heading into this federal election, that social media, the online commentators that we're engaging with have a massive power this election to influence the outcome. So I think to underestimate it would be a mistake by legacy media and politicians alike.
Now, you're no stranger to the limelight. You're a digital creator. You've been covering news and politics for some time now. But over the last fortnight, it feels like things have really ramped up and kind of taken a whole new level with the budget, the media coverage, and even an AEC investigation. Why do you think it has sparked such a ruckus?
I think because legacy media is also looking for a new story. I think that they're specifically territorial in ensuring that politicians alike feel the need to pressure and investigate and interrogate this relationship between, new media, digital creators, commentators, and how that influences outcomes. I think that what's really interesting from my perspective is I've been doing this for years, and mainstream media, Murdoch media specifically, has not even bothered to look at me or talk to me. And suddenly, when they feel threatened, when they feel sort of most at risk during this election cycle of being made irrelevant, which they have been dying for years, in my opinion, they've decided to arc up and attack. And they're doing that through the manipulation of language. They're doing that by calling us influencers, by calling us self-obsessed, by belittling a group of specifically and dominantly young women who are threatening and daring to change the way political communication occurs in this country and speaking directly to voters about the issues that matter to them, which legacy media has been failing to do for a very long time. And I think the rising criticism is very reflective of how threatened they feel by us.
Speaking on this, whether it be politicians or the AEC investigation, Abby Chatfield has commented on this, and she'd come out saying that she feels that the investigation was prompted by the coalition kind of in an attempt to discredit influencers and keep them out of the political sphere. What do you think?
It's really interesting to watch them attack influencers. Like Senator Jane Hume, I know I've seen Senator Andrew Bragg said that influencers are cash for comment. Well, I would say the exact same about most politicians in this country. And I would say the same for the Murdoch media in large part. These people have advertisers, they have donors, they have interest in things like the gambling lobby, in the alcohol industry, in the fossil fuel industry with large corporations. I think it's really interesting that Abby Chatfield has a large platform of more than 600,000 dedicated followers, most of which are young progressive women who are interested in these issues, and the sheer thought of her accessing and having a conversation across the table with Leader of the Greens Adam Bandt and Prime Minister Anthony Albanese poses such a threat to them that they had to go and seek an investigation through the AEC, which I think is actually a fantastic thing to do. It's been tested, and clearly the AEC has cleared Abby on those fronts of those interviews. But I think the way the media circus has erupted is interesting, given that the very critics of Abby Chatfield are the people that should probably be holding a mirror up to themselves in the first instance.
There has been a bit of criticism thrown around, and I want to put some of these things to you. One of the most prominent ones has been that these politicians are using content creators to try and manipulate and propagandize their way through the election. What do you make of that?
I mean, I understand that there is a distinction and something to be said for the fact that I can't speak on behalf of all creators or digital creators, all forms of new media, because I represent just one portion of that. And I think that the language of influencer is derogatory, specifically that it's been plastered over my face, because I'm someone who has come out and said I'm transparent about the fact that I create opinionated, left-wing, feminist content and commentary for the people of this country who are looking for a different kind of indie media. And so from that perspective, when I'm speaking for myself, which I feel like I can, it's that I don't feel that I'm a propaganda machine for any of the parties in this country. I'm super critical of all, and I'm someone who speaks openly about my engagement with Teal independents, with the Greens as a minor party, with the Labor Party politicians. I went to Parliament recently and met with, I think, 17 politicians in one day across what I would describe as the progressive spectrum. Now, I do have a clear anti-coalition agenda. I'm not afraid to shy away from that. That is blatantly who I am. I've had people call me, I actually proudly accept the title of the one-woman anti-Dutton machine. My goal is to keep Peter Dutton out of the lodge, out of Kirribilli. And I think that moving forward, there are different creators who are doing different things in this space, and we are not one homogenous group. And I think that's important to identify. And we do different things. A lot of the creators in the budget lockup were finance creators and educators. And so to put us into one basket is, one, unfair. But to speak about the fact as if we are a blanket rule sort of pro-Labor is really interesting. What I would say I'm one of the harshest critics of the Labor Party, or my platform personally. And what I think is instead the conversation is, for legacy media that is shifting so much of that conversation onto us and the way that we engage with political parties, they are also running an agenda set by their advertisers and set by the people that helm these mastheads. And I think it's interesting the way that they've turned it on us and the way that they are continuing to degrade and erode the trust in us, which isn't working. Because what we do is transparently communicate with our audience about the issues we feel they care about, which are issues we care about. And we're transparent and authentic and organic, and that's why we've developed trusted followings where theirs have fallen away. And I think that is the more important conversation right now, is that they are spinning the narrative constantly, which is what they do best, to make it about us and the fault and the holes, instead of actually having an open conversation about their failures to maintain relevance in this country.
Do you think more the problem is stemming then from when creators don't do what yourself and Abby have done, where you guys have been transparent about your bias? Do you think the issue is when creators don't disclose their bias as clearly as you guys have?
I think that when we're talking about transparency and bias, it's important to be honest about our subjectivity and our failings. Like, I'm constantly trying to own up to the fact that I'm an individual who will make mistakes and I will fail often in the work that I do. I think that that's something that's so not accepted in online spaces, in media, in any sort of power position in this country. And having frank conversations about how we form the opinions we do is the way that we have healthy and respectful dialogue. And that's been missing from our political discourse for a long time now. I think that we should have a conversation about the standard of conversation in this country and the way that we report on matters. But that is a nationwide discussion about the state of the Australian media landscape, which is an important one to have. But instead it's being focused on influencers and young women being frivolous, silly and untrustworthy. And that's where the problem lies for me. I do hope creators have, a very credible stance of being transparent and forward in where they're coming from. Like, for me personally, I refuse to have anything paid for when traveling to Canberra for the budget lockup. I do not take any money from any political party. I work very much outside of that realm and I'm transparent about that. But I think also it's important to be honest about the affiliations that we do have, the meetings we have, the conversations we have, and that's what I always strive for. And I think that most creators that I engage with care deeply about that too.
And another criticism off the back of that around the budget specifically was that some political posts by creators, they feel that they can oversimplify, say, complex issues or maybe not give enough context. So similar to how parties might communicate in their ads. For example, I'll give you one. There's chatter online about Peter Dutton recently voting against tax cuts for all Australians, but some of the posts might lack the reasoning behind it, which was the coalition has said it felt $17 billion is too much to spend to get $5 to $10 a week back for the Aussie taxpayer. What do you say to that?
I think it's a great criticism. I think that we should always be interrogating and looking into and having an accountability structure with the content that we engage with. I think that's vitally important. But I also think that we need to, again, broaden our lens and say, what is the difference between that and the Daily Mail headline or the Australian article, which has the same level of bias and the same level of manipulation, distortion of reality, the same level of limitation to the facts, the same agenda that they're singularly driving and have been for decades, just to a different age demographic and a different subscriber base. But I think that when we're talking about new media, we should have an accountability structure. And I think that we actually have a more intense one because individuals that follow us have the ability to engage in our comment section with us directly. So there is that feedback loop to a higher level, and there is the ability for followers to opt in and out depending on if they're getting the required nuance and the required dialogue and the level of sophistication in the media that the followers want. In saying that, I understand and acknowledge that I'm not a journalist. I have a legal degree. I have a law background. So for me, I see the value in having that criticism and openly saying, I've never claimed to be a journalist. What I'm instead trying to do personally is not claim to offer reporting anything but to offer progressive opinions on the sort of media that we're consuming, on politicians' decisions and their advocacy and what they're putting forward as a policy platform, but noting that that's imperfect because I'm an individual with an opinion, but I'm not going to be able to provide for the sort of journalistic level that a lot of sort of the mainstream media is pointing out. And I admit and acknowledge that. But I think when having this conversation, it's just interesting the level of hypocrisy that we're seeing. People need to exist in a broader ecosystem and have a more sort of in-depth media diet, as I would describe, and know that they're not getting information from one location. I think that in this ecosystem, social media commentators have an important role to play, but it cannot be the sole thing that people are consuming as well.
Yeah, and look, I take your point. I think you've made a good argument in terms of nobody could say that there is no bias in certain portions of the traditional media landscape. That's long been talked about. So perhaps this is a discussion that needs to be had for both modern and traditional media, that there needs to be these standards. Now, before I let you go, many of the criticisms that I've raised have been brought up in some articles in mastheads like The Australian, who I'm going to be interviewing someone from that paper very shortly. Do you have a message for them?
To the Australian and mastheads like it who are publishing derogatory and sort of reductive articles about people like me and Abby Chatfield, the thing I would say is it's time to adapt or die. Your subscriber base knows it. The country knows it. We are seeing through your spin. We are cutting through your noise, and we are reaching audiences where they are. And I think that this is an opportunity for them to step up and start reporting differently and start approaching the news differently, because that's what Australians want. And instead they are digging their heels in and sticking by the archaic messaging that will ensure their demise.
Wow, Hannah, what a way to finish. Thank you very much for joining me on The Briefing today.
Thank you so much, Tara.
That was digital creator Hannah Ferguson speaking with me there in part 1 of this 2-part special on content creators in politics. Part 2 is in your feeds right now, and that's my chat with Jenna Clark, associate editor from The Australian, where we get her take on all of this. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That's it for now. Before you go, though, we'd love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might enjoy it. It's a really easy way you can support us and all we do here at The Briefing. So is sharing our social posts. Check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast, and on TikTok and YouTube, search Listener Newsroom. I'm Tara Cassidy. See you next time.
Listener.